So thanks everybody for coming. The topic of today's energy working group meeting is as if assuming that your town has an energy committee, what is it that we need to be thinking about now to get ready for town meeting in the future? So for example, last year here in Merrimack, we had community power on the ballot and we had to get the town organized and educate people and get the ballot initiative going and things like that. So we have Sarah from Clean Energy New Hampshire here from us today, who is going to take us through some things to consider. And because we don't have too much of a large group, Sarah, is it okay if people ask questions as they arise, or do you want us to hold them?
Absolutely. Let's keep this a dialogue. So
Okay.
chime in if you've got questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sarah. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Hello, everyone. I know most of the folks on the call. Good to see you, Chuck. We spoke earlier this week. And I have something here today that I will just run you through that my team just created. But I'm going to give you a quick orientation to who I am and why we're doing this today. The Clean Energy New Hampshire Circuit Rider team is hopefully familiar to most of you. We are based around the state.
Mhm.
I am operating out of Concord, but we've got staff who are based in Keene and Easton and Lee, which means that we've got coverage in the Southwest and the North Country
Oh, okay.
and Seacoast region for hands-on technical assistance to
Oh, goodness.
municipalities. So those of you
Do you
in
want to
those
go
regions have
inside for this
probably
rain?
worked with us. And Lisa, go ahead and mute yourself if you've got a sec. Um, and we also have a pair of staff, in addition to those municipal focused circuit riders who work with small businesses and agricultural producers, farms. So, to the extent to which you've got folks in your region who have been interested in USDA REAP funding, which can provide 50% of project cost for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. If you are a small business or a farm, our team may have worked with them, or you could send them our way. So that's us. We are growing and trying to have statewide reach. And for those of you who are not located in the North Country, the Seacoast, or Sullivan or Cheshire counties,
Stai escuchando.
please be in touch. I am your best
Arriba.
primary
Dottori,
contact, and we will do our best to help
ocho.
you, even though we don't have someone on the ground in your region. So that's us. And our team this time of year starts looking ahead to March because any of you who have tried to move anything through town meeting know that this is the moment of the year where you have to start talking to your select board about budget priorities, getting warrant articles drafted, and getting those projects solidified that you're going to bring to voters. So what we're going to do today is walk through a timeline that my team put together on paper just in the last week. So this is a very fresh resource that we hope to add to as we work with towns through the course of the next 6, 8 months, um, to share some of the best practices and our experience in what it takes. This is going to sound really familiar to some of you, and I hope that you will chime in with your own experience of what has worked well or questions about things that you're surprised to see in there or that you don't quite understand. And we'll just kind of slowly walk it through timeline style from now through the end of March and see where the conversation takes us. Any questions before I dive in? Okay.
Yes,
Before
if
we
you show us things, will you also be able to provide those materials to me and I'll put them up with the recording? Okay,
absolutely. Yep.
perfect. Thank you.
And what I'm going to do is share my screen for ease, but I will also link to the resource in the chat in case folks want to be able to scroll through and explore it while I'm talking. I'll do both. And then this is currently it's a Google Doc that has an open access link. So you can take that, Mary Beth, and immediately put that up. And we will be refreshing it. So that link will stay current. Before we start, I would love it if you would type in the chat anything that you are already planning to bring to town meeting, just so that we can get a sense from each other of what kinds of projects some of you might already be thinking about this timeline with respect to. So take a moment, type in anything that you are considering bringing to town meeting in March. Great, we've got heat pumps for the fire police station in Nelson. You've got community power, possibly in Merrimack. There's a solar project in Wolfboro that may need
You get
some
in soon,
funds
but I can't get
allocated.
in on my PC. You can get in.
Oh, hi, Clyde.
Hey, what's your link?
What's the link? Sorry.
Let me get in. Oh, do we have internet here? We do.
Oh, Clyde, go ahead and mute yourself. I think we're hearing you. There you go. Thanks. We've got EVC infrastructure component for our zoning ordinance. Maybe a ground mount array in Lancaster. We've got some folks waiting on the New Hampshire DOE solar grant, and if that goes through, needing to get that project approved. We've got um, I'm curious. I know you're with 350 New Hampshire. Are you talking about a specific town, or is this sort of generally something you're working with multiple towns on?
So this is in Durham, where I'm also on the energy committee. And so
Gotcha.
we do have a little bit more flexibility. We go through town council,
Yep.
and don't have to wait till March, but those are two of our goals for this year.
Yeah. Thank you for raising that. That's a good caveat for today. What we're going to be talking through is assuming that you have a town meeting in March. Some towns have a town meeting in June. Some towns aren't towns, they're cities, and therefore you would go through a city council process. And what we're talking about in terms of timeline doesn't apply. That being said, some of the project development components bringing something to city council may still be relevant. Okay, amazing. And then David says that brand new energy commission, hoping to establish a capital reserve fund, which I'm glad you mentioned, David. That is, you will hear me mention that multiple times today. Our team was talking about this earlier in the month about what we wanted energy committees to be focused on this year. And all of us agreed that we needed to make sure that everyone we were in contact with either had an energy reserve fund or was planning to create one. We have found they are incredibly useful, and I'll go through some of why later today. Okay, amazing. Thank you. That gives everyone a hint of what your peers are juggling. Let me share both a link and then my screen, and we can start going through this timeline together. So first thing I'm going to do is link to resource. So feel free if you would like to open this as a separate window. I'm also going to share my screen so you can see where I am in the document. So let me just get my screen sharing up here. Okay. Great. You should be seeing a doc that says, "Are you ready for town meeting?" This is a quick snapshot of the timeline that I alluded to a moment ago. In order to get voters to vote on a thing at town meeting, you need to have a finalized warrant article, if that is how you're approaching it, or a budget line item finalized typically by the end of December. There's a section further on in this resource that gives more detail about that, but there are requirements from the state about when the town has to post about what the budget is and what the warrant articles are that will be voted on by voters. And it's typically the last, I think, Monday in January, last week of January at least. And the town will have other deadlines for you of when you need to get your piece in so that they can meet their state requirement. And that means that you've got to be finalizing project details now, September and October, in order to be ready to draft and finalize your warrant articles and make sure you've got your select board on board in order for the town to meet that deadline of January to post that publicly. And that means that in January and February, after you've done your work of scoping out the project and submitting a warrant article, you're in public outreach mode. The more you can do in that time to educate your town leadership and your voters about what is to be voted on, the less likely you are to have surprises at town meeting. So let's dive in to the first piece, finalizing project details, which typically, as I said, happens all throughout the year, right up through about the end of October or into early November. I'm just going to read some of the headers and give a little bit of context. I'll try not to just read the doc, but feel free to interject if you want me to go deeper. Obviously, you need to make sure your select board knows what you're doing. We do have towns that get too far down the line in the project planning process without talking to their select boards, and that can create unnecessary drama and confusion that can hold the project up. So early and often communication. The towns that are able to send a committee member to every select board meeting are the towns that have the greatest success. And in your town, you may be able to find a rhythm that works best. Second is very early on asking what your town's purchasing policy is. If you don't already know, that's because you probably will be working with contractors and you need to know what the town requires of you in order to select a contractor to work with on a project. And you can't put together a very clear warrant article unless you have a contractor identified who's giving you a price that you can go and ask voters for money based on. So some towns will have minimum requirements for competitive bids. Some towns will have different or looser requirements, but you need to know what you're dealing with before you talk to contractors. Third piece has to do with project cost. Typically, the ultimate price tag that you're going to voters on will be based on an actual detailed quote from a contractor. When you are working with contractors, something to ask about is contingency, because it is a whole lot easier to ask for more money and then give some of it back to the town than to ask for not enough money and then try to find the money you need because something came up. We often recommend that you work with your contractor, the contractor you have decided to work with, to have them build into your final quote some reasonable contingency so that you have a bit of a buffer built in. And the appropriate amount of that buffer will vary by type of project and the scale of the project, but have the conversation. You're just trying to avoid getting halfway into project implementation, having something come up and having to trash the whole project because you don't have a way to raise that missing bit of funding. Second, you're obviously wanting to scope for all incentives and grants that could help fund the project. Clean Energy New Hampshire is a very good resource for you in this, and we are happy to take calls almost any time with, hey, we want to do this project. Are you aware of funding sources that we should be thinking about? We have a spreadsheet that we try to maintain as much as we can. So when I get a call like that, I'm pulling up that spreadsheet and I'm sort of ticking off the sources that I'm aware of and sending you whatever information you need. The New Hampshire Department of Energy has a very useful newsletter. Comes someone's talking who should mute themselves. It comes out weekly and it can be a little bit of a bear to read, but it typically includes funding sources and a fairly comprehensive list of them. So someone on your energy committee ought to subscribe to that newsletter, and I can follow up with anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about. It is important to know that most incentives and grants come after the project is completed, which means you still have to go to the town to request the whole project amount and hopefully specify to them how much of that is going to be raised by taxation versus reimbursed to the town from tax credits, grant funding, whatever the case might be. But that's important for you to understand. So I'm going to move on now. Any questions? Like I said, this will be an overview for many of you who have done this before. Okay, so the next question, so I'm going back up to your little timeline here. That's all about what you need from the project. We're starting to get into the moving towards a warrant article. And the first question is, do you need a warrant article? The first thing you want to do is talk to your select board. They will have an opinion about whether they want to see your ask as a warrant article or whether they think they could build it into the budget or whether there's some other option. Some towns have rules about what can be a warrant article. For example, I'm aware of towns that have a line under which they don't want to see a warrant article if it's less than $10,000. If it's less than $5,000, they'd rather find another way. So talk to your town. It will be different for every community. Next, make sure you talk to town staff. Now, it depends on the town how easy it is for you to access your department heads, your fire and safety chief, your Department of Public Works. But to the extent to which you can build those relationships, those folks have their own budgets and will have opinions, as will the select board, about what they just want to build into their own budget. or there's a chart down below that I'll look at in a minute with some examples, but you want to have those conversations and let the staff and the select board drive where they want the ask to come. Third point is that you should really consider creating an energy capital reserve fund. This is something that you can do even in a year where you don't have a project on the line. You can ask the voters to put some money aside toward future energy saving projects. And if you've got funds already set aside, it is a whole lot easier to meet the grant requirements or take advantage of opportunities as they come. My team works with a lot of communities. We are supporting over 200 projects in over 90 towns statewide. And the communities with capital reserve funds set aside for energy have a whole lot easier time moving projects forward. So if you don't have one, set one up. We'll get to that in a minute. So we put together a little chart for you here with some examples of the sorts of things you might go to the town and seek a vote on or seek approval for, and whether that might end up being appropriate for a warrant article, a budget line item, or a select board vote. I'm assuming that everyone here knows what I mean when I say warrant article, but if you've been to town meeting, you know that there's the budget, with a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of lines where you can see everything that makes up the municipal budget. And then there's a whole lot of Article 1, Article 2, Article 3 that have very specific asks to see if the voters will raise $5,000 to purchase a lawnmower for the town. I mean, they can be anything. That's what I mean by warrant article. It's called out very specifically in the warrant, and they're voted on individually if you have a town meeting where you go in person and you vote. And similarly, if you have a town where you're going, an SB2 town where you're having a deliberative session and then going and voting, it's a separate yes or no for each of those items if it's a warrant article. A budget line item is just a line within the big budget, and there's just a yes or no on the budget itself. Again, this is very elementary, just making sure we are all on the same page. And then select board vote simply means that anytime throughout the year, the select board could vote and move something forward. So let's do a couple of examples. An energy capital reserve fund, you would have to take that to town meeting as a warrant article to create or put funding into such a fund. And the select board is most likely to be labeled the agent to extend that fund. So once the fund is created, say you put $20,000 into it, after that point, you could go to the select board and request that they approve spending some of that $20,000 almost at any point in the year. Creating an energy committee, that's something the select board can do. Typically for solar PV installations, and often, although not always, even if it's fully funded, the select board might want to see that come to a town vote. And that's why it's really important to always go to the select board and ask if they want to see your project in your particular case show up as a warrant article. Solar tax exemptions, that would always have to come before the voters at town meeting. Energy audits, I've seen towns put that as a warrant article to raise $3,000 for an energy audit. Most commonly, that's either built into the budget or the select board finds the funding somewhere and it's approved, mid-year. For modest energy efficiency measures, that's often something that an individual department will build into their budget, and so you want to be proactively talking to them about that. It's also possible that if the select board is coming to the end of the year and they know they've got funds available, they might just approve, especially if you can make a case. Equipment purchase is something that you would often see either going into a department budget or showing up as a warrant article. Again, the town will decide on a case-by-case basis. I'm thinking like the EV police cruiser, the big new boiler for the elementary school, whatever the case might be. Community power aggregation, this was mentioned. I know many of you have either gone through a town meeting to vote on community power or are about to. That is usually a warrant article at a town meeting, but if your county is a member, the select board could choose to do that vote at the select board level. The solar zoning ordinance changes, that would start at the planning board, but then ultimately would come to town meeting as a recommendation from the planning board. And then I threw this one on there because you should know that it is possible to be a municipal member of Clean Energy New Hampshire. And that is something that can either be built into the budget or voted on by the select board. The current rate of that is $300. It covers a handful of tickets to the annual LES conference, and it shows your support if you like working with us. Any questions about that section? Okay. I trust you'll chime in, but I do know that I'm running through things that should feel familiar. All right, so if you've determined you need a warrant article, the next step is to draft such a thing. The first question you're going to ask is what the process is in your town for requesting and getting a warrant article approved. That's a question for your select board if you've not done it before. Related to that, you want to know what your deadline is. I mentioned that on or before the last Monday of January is the state deadline for the towns to post the completed list of warrant articles along with their budget. So it's going to be sometime before then that you've got to get your ducks in a row and over to the select board. Once you're to the point of knowing your timelines and what your deadline and process are, you can start drafting. We've got a list of sample warrant articles that's relatively extensive. I don't know if you'll be able to see it if I open it up. So if you click the link in the chat, you can explore this yourself. And we would like to add more. So if you've got a warrant article that you want us to add to this library, please send it along. With respect to the language of the warrant article, you'll notice that many of these warrant articles reference grant awards or other sources of funding. If you have a grant award that's already been received, typically that means you haven't actually got the funding in hand because again, grant funding often comes after the project is completed, but you typically have a commitment from that funder that the award has been made to you and you will have a contract with them of some sort. So if you've got something like that, you want to be specific and mention that specific grant and the specific committed amount of money that the taxpayers are not going to have to raise toward this project. If you are in a situation where you're needing to finalize a warrant article, but you have not yet heard whether you've got the funding or there's a grant opportunity coming up that you have not yet applied to, but you will have done and you are planning to, you can allude to that. You want to be as open-ended as you can in case, I mean, you wouldn't want to say this, you wouldn't want to make your warrant article contingent on having funding from the XYZ charitable foundation, because if they fell through, but you found something else, you might be stuck there. So make it open-ended, but you can indicate to voters that we are asking for your approval, but we will not move ahead with this project unless we are able to raise X amount through grant funding, for example. And then once you've got a draft, then you want to make sure that you are going to your select board early and presenting that draft and seeking input and making sure that the select board feels very in the loop about what you're doing. By the end of the warrant article process, most select boards will vote amongst themselves about whether to recommend or not recommend warrant articles. If you've ever been to your town meeting or seen your town report, which I expect you have, there's often a line at the end of the warrant article that says the select board recommends this 5-1 or whatever the case might be. You want that indicator at the bottom of your warrant article. Much more likely to pass if you can have that little footnote saying your select board recommends. And the only way to get that is by being really proactive and communicating, making sure the select board feels comfortable. So let's assume the select board puts it in and they're going to vote in favor. When you get to the point of January, when this thing has been posted and the voters conceptually are aware that this will be voted on, you've got the job of making sure that voters are comfortable and ready to vote yes. A couple of questions to ask yourself. One, find out how voters in your town find out about warrant articles. It's different in every community. Is there a formal website? Is there an annual report? Is there something that goes out that includes not only the warrant article, but also some additional text that you could use to explain what it is? It's different in every town. So find out where this is going to show up and whether there's anything you can do to provide some additional context. Find out where you can post about this in your community. This is, general outreach 101, but if there are message boards, local newsletters, make sure that you've got your energy committee members and others posting about this and trying to educate the public generally that this is coming and why we should vote for it. Be anticipating concerns that you think voters will have and try to get ahead of them. I gave you some prompts in this guide. You want to think about who's going to benefit from this project, who's going to be affected positively or negatively, who might be harmed. Talk to your neighbors and town leaders and try to anticipate what those concerns might be. You will want to be prepared to speak to them at town meeting, and you do not want to be surprised. We've all had that happen. And then think about who's going to be there at town meeting to speak on behalf of the project. You may not need to, but if you do, it's very helpful to have your contractor there or contractors, which you can do if you've already selected them and committed to working with them pending town approval. Helpful to have members of your committee who've thought through the concerns that might come up to have responses ready. And then think about who might not be aware that this is happening, who might be under a rock, and who could be very surprised and maybe put up a fight if they learn this is happening and they didn't know about it, and just try to get to them early. It's hard to predict, but we've seen too many projects be voted down because somebody came out of the woodwork who didn't know and got frustrated through a stink. Comments or questions so far? Okay. And then we already talked a bit about town meeting. Encourage folks to show up. Some of the other tips, and then we can open it up for broader discussion. Every town is different. We certainly work with towns where it is not a good idea to have more than one warrant article related to energy in any given year. Your select board will have an instinct as to the appetite of the town for more than one in a year. So if you already have one project planned, be very thoughtful about whether to also ask for an energy reserve fund or also ask for the second big expenditure. Just be strategic. Second, I guess I did this in reverse order. So the first point, which I thought I was talking about, don't ever go with nothing if you can help it. So in a year where you don't have anything to propose, if you don't already have a capital reserve fund, start one. And if you already have a capital reserve fund, ask for an allocation. And just make sure that's standard. And then finally, it is possible that your select board will fight you, even if you have brought them on board from the very start and given a very good pitch as to why this just should support you. If that happens, you can bring a warrant article anyway through a petition process. And I don't have it in here, but I was in touch with New Hampshire Municipal Association earlier today, and I'll be adding some resources about that into this guide tomorrow. Continue communicating with them, even if they seem to have shut you down, because you may be able to turn them around, and put extra time and effort into public outreach in that case, because you may well have a situation where the town report says the select board does not recommend, and you have to work twice as hard to convince voters to go against the select board. We've all been there, and if you haven't, you will eventually be there. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I do have a little bit more about energy capital reserve funds that I can share, but I'm going to pause for a moment and see if anything I've said is jogged up experience you want to share, thoughts, questions. So I will stop sharing and open it up for a moment. Catherine, if you're talking to us, I can't hear you because you're muted.
Okay. I have a comment about town meeting and educating the public. To bring in a contractor who's not a resident of the town, non-voters can't speak without permission of the town to allow them to speak. So perhaps town forums ahead of time is a better way to introduce the project. And hopefully through the forum, the committee will have answers to something that comes up at town meeting. If it's not allowed to have the contractor speak.
That's a great point. And a way to get around that is to make sure your select board and town moderator are very aware and supportive of that individual being there, because of course they would be the ones to sort of recommend to the voters that person be allowed. And I'm going to add that to the guide. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, Gerald. Oh, you're muted. You're fine.
I'm sorry I came in late, but could you go back over what you said about the energy audit um, as a possibility for the Energy Committee to somehow sponsor?
Yeah, absolutely. Most energy audits are not particularly expensive. There's even a program through New Hampshire CDFA, Community Development Finance Authority, which typically has funding to cover 75% of what's called a level 2 audit, which is a fairly technical commercial grade audit. So we're talking a couple, like probably at least 1,000 or so, but up to a few $1,000. And that's a level of funding that you can often not have to go to a warrant article for. I would typically recommend folks get a find out how much it would be, find out what building, but then talk to the select board. In many cases, a select board will find a way to approve and green light an energy audit sort of any time of year if you can make a good case for why you need it and when, and especially if you can bring the this grant opportunity to cover most of the cost. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think so. Was the New Hampshire Development, what was the agency?
Yeah, the New Hampshire CDFA, which is Community Finance Development Authority.
Okay, finance.
There's a
development.
gentleman named Scott Mislansky who runs an energy program, and one of their offerings is a grant that can cover 75% of energy audit costs for municipalities.
Okay. Now,
The town of
yeah.
the town of
Is this
Sandwich.
I'm sorry, is this an energy audit for the municipal facilities only, or is it possible to extend it to residents?
There's a separate program for energy audits for residents. For residents, you would be sending them to NH Saves. There's
Right.
a calculator on their website that asks
Yeah.
for square footage and energy use, and then if you meet a certain threshold of amount of energy per square foot, they will offer you $100 energy audit, and if
Right.
not, they'll give you some other, but that's a very totally separate
Right. Okay.
process. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
San
Catherine.
process energy audits, and we CDFA doesn't have any funding currently, but we'll hear next month whether they're going to be funded for the future. So we have two providers in our town. Eversource is paying 100% of the audit for the building in that town, and what is it? The one
Is
community
it New Hampshire Electric Co-op?
New Hampshire Electric Co-op, thanks.
Yeah.
They only are 50%, but the selectmen had some funds, so they allowed us to do two buildings. And we'll want to do more next year, and we don't have to get anybody's permission but the selectmen for that.
Yeah. And that is another good point, which I should have raised. You would almost always start with NH Saves, and depending on the situation, they often have the ability to provide you with some help toward the audit. And each of the utilities has a designated municipal staffer who would be your person to reach out to and talk to. And if you don't know who that is, you can contact me, and I can connect you at any time with who your right person might be. And it does change from time to time, so it's not a bad idea to check with me first. Other questions or experience? For those of you who have been through this before, which is many of you, my team put this together in part because we were getting questions, and we have a number of committees that have never been through this before, and members of committees who are new to how municipal government works. Did we miss anything major? Did what we put together here seem like a helpful reference point? We'd love feedback so that this can be useful to you and others. So Carrie, give me a little bit of a head nod. Might have not been for me.
Well, I happen to be on a very new energy committee. We're barely 1 year old. And so I have a naive question, like, how do you go about establishing or persuading people that you need an energy reserve fund? And the town I live in is not particularly interested in solar panels or anything like that. So
Yeah.
I feel like immediately to be like, oh, you tree hugging solar panel people, go back to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
words of
Well, we can
advice.
talk about that. I've got another 2-pager on capital reserve funds that tries to make that case, so we can look at that together.
Okay, right.
Before we do that, Clyde, did you have another comment that's unrelated to capital reserve funds?
Yeah. One thing I would like to mention is that the value of community outreach ahead of town meeting, getting out and maybe you can have a public information session or having brochures that you can distribute to people and that sort of thing. Build support before you get to town meeting is really, really important. That we've used that a couple of times in Warner, and that's I'd recommend with highly that should be done.
Yeah, I agree, Clyde, and you've certainly got the experience to back that up. Lisa, do you have a comment that's unrelated to reserve funds to throw in before we switch gears?
No, I'll wait until the reserve funds, I guess.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen again and show you another resource, quickly walk you through it. It's not as long as the other one, and then we can chat about it. Harry, was that a hand?
Yeah, it looks like let's answer Harry's question before.
Yeah, Harry. Go ahead, Harry. If you can hear us. Well, I'll work on sharing my screen while Harry maybe gets some audio working.
Oh, it's working now.
Oh, great. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Sarah. So I have a question about energy, not really energy audits, but the building permit process where a town may want to have a higher level of requirement than the current energy code that is in the state.
Yeah.
And, it's fine to have solar collectors and, energy producing, but if we don't have buildings that are tighter, then we really aren't achieving all that much. So, I sort of understand that if you have regulations that just suggest that somebody does something, then it very rarely gets done. But if the code says you must have this level of insulation, and maybe you must do air sealing and have a blower door test or something like that, then you can achieve a higher level of efficiency from an energy standpoint. But for towns to do that, it seems difficult to have the resources to even do the exercise, right? So I just wonder, is there a framework for towns to get there?
Em raised their hands. You're in Durham, right? Yeah. Do you want to speak first before I chime in? Durham's the one community in the state that has done this, and you'll need to unmute yourself, Em.
So Durham did this back in 2016, and we effectively had a higher energy building code in effect in our town for 8 years. And at first there was a little pushback. It applied across all residences, all buildings, so included single family homes as well as commercial multifamily. We had a couple of times builders made some mistakes and then they had to fix some things, but it was not a big deal. There was worry that there would have been some blowback, but builders really got used to it very quickly. The building inspector's office was really on top of informing people ahead of time. And we actually got really nice feedback because we have a lot of landlords in Durham because of UNH. We got really nice feedback from the Landlords Association about how quickly they recouped the money from these improvements. And in 2016, it was estimated as about $700 in additional construction costs per unit. And that was very quickly recouped for developers if they were landlords, and obviously for owners if they were homeowners. Unfortunately, though, this year, the state of New Hampshire passed a new law that voids the town's abilities to do that unless the town has to submit their new energy codes to a special board. And I forget exactly what the name of the board is. I think maybe Sarah Brock can help clarify that.
Even I don't remember, but we can find it.
Yeah, and so that board has to approve the town's basically adoption of anything different from the state building code. And the state building code has become more regressive. So it's the state energy building code is locked in right now at the 2018 code. So it's the Building Code Review Board is the name of the board that the town has to send its energy code requirements to. So that's kind of been a blow. It's a big blow to Durham's own program. We are working as a town to submit our ordinance before the Building Code Review Board, but are just not sure whether it's going to get approved. We are looking at ways to kind of get around this a little bit. And for example, we're looking at our workforce housing ordinance and wondering if we tie density bonuses to higher energy standards, can we still convince developers to build to higher energy standards because they get these higher density bonuses, which make it more attractive to develop, but they only get them if they're doing really good energy standards. So that's one way that we might be able to kind of get around that law and make it a incentive-based energy code versus a energy code requirement. And I hope that's helpful. I'm happy. I'll put my email in the chat if you want to talk more about it. I'm happy to share a little bit more about the experience. If you have more questions.
Thank you.
Part of what I hope we'll do in this group over time is identify those of you that have particular areas of expertise and experience and sort of get good at knowing who to go to. And clearly Em is a good person to go to around this. We've also got someone on my staff, Chris Skogland, who some of you know, who's been very involved with building codes and understanding what Durham's been through and tracing this in the legislature for years. And so if this is a topic that many of us want to dive into, we can take it offline in another meeting as well. Paul, I know you also know a lot about this.
Yeah, I just mentioned in the chat. I'm involved with Granite State ASHRAE and New Hampshire ASHRAE. We'll be submitting 2021 codes again this year. We've had a heck of a time with the Building Code Review Board. They don't have any mechanical engineers on it. They are being lobbied by the gas organization, the National Gas Organization. New Hampshire Home Builders has partnered with them for some reason. They don't want to have these codes either. So it's been a fight. It'll continue to be a fight. Hopefully we'll get a change this coming year in legislation or in makeup so that we can get these things passed. By the way, Harry, there's no commissioning requirement in the state of New Hampshire either. So, you can put out a code and say, it has to meet this requirement, but there's nobody checking because they took commissioning out of it as well because they continue to scream cost. Commissioning, checking to make sure the builders did the right thing would cost too much money. So we don't need to do that. They'll police themselves. And this is the current thinking at the State House.
Right. So do keep raising this if this is a topic that folks would like to chat about, because we could always have one of our monthly chats about this. But I want to turn back, since we've got for just 15 minutes left, to capital reserve funds, unless anyone has an objection. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen briefly and show you just some of the guidance we've put out for folks who are asking about this. Just a moment.
While we look at that, Sarah, one of the things to note about capital reserve, it's a good point because when the Department of Energy, New Hampshire or federal provides a grant, they generally do not supply maintenance on these solar, for example, solar arrays, which was the most recent one. So they do not do any kind of maintenance or any kind of upgrade, anything. So you have to have some money somewhere or you can't actually get the grant.
Yep. And often they will cover I mean, in the case of the most recent Department of Energy funds for municipal solar, they weren't going to cover the interconnection costs. Like there's
That's
a
right.
couple of little fine print things. So
That's
you've
right.
got to be ready and able to tell them, we've got a plan for that, which is easier to do if you have a fund. So capital reserve funds, I think this group probably knows what a capital reserve fund is. They're all over your town report and your warrant articles. They can be established for anything, and there's an increasing number of towns that are establishing them for energy related things. I'll show you some examples in a few minutes. Some of the reasons that we encourage folks to talk about why they're helpful. One is access to grant funding, and Paul alluded to this. The reality is that most grants don't cover 100% of project costs. Some of them do, but even those that do, like this most recent Department of Energy solar grant, still have fine print, and the maintenance and the interconnection or whatever it might be might still be there. So, and in some of these cases, you might be more competitive, or it would be easier for you to jump on the opportunity if you already had the funding set aside. Some funding, especially when it is tied to federal funding, must be spent by a certain date and cannot wait until after town meeting and then it's installed 7, 8 months from now. That doesn't happen all the time, but it happens frequently enough that the towns with a capital reserve fund are getting those grant dollars. It can also help you to be able to move a project along in a more logical time frame. It doesn't lock you into the March approval if you've already gone to the voters and talked to the select board about wanting to work towards a solar project, wanting to work towards an efficiency project, and not being quite ready to propose it now, but would like the voters to set aside funds towards such an effort. The towns that have them are able to move projects faster, smoother, and take advantage of opportunities. The how to create them really starts with looking at examples from other towns. So let me pull these up so you can see what this resource is. Are you seeing sample warrant articles on your screen?
Yes.
Great. So this is an open resource. You'll be able to access it. We have a whole bunch of examples, and the whole first section is related to creating a capital reserve fund. Most of the examples that we have to date are related to like specific to solar energy capital reserve. There's a couple that talk about, I mean, this one specifically talks about for the purpose of covering costs or grant matches relating to energy efficiency. This is another solar. You can see some of them come with the language that appeared in their final report recommended by the Board of Selectmen, majority vote required. That's sort of common when you see them posted publicly. There was a town that did not pass this, but Whitefield attempted to create a very general grant match reserve fund that they could use for any kind of grant to their municipality. And that was just too broad for voters. So any of you that have tried to create reserve funds will know that there's like a Goldilocks spot. And the only way to know what it is to work pretty proactively with your select board to try to figure out what might be palatable to voters. But you want to be broad enough that you've got flexibility to use the funds regardless of what opportunity might come up, but you have to be specific enough that the voters feel comfortable giving you a blank check in that realm. So that's why a lot of the funds that have passed historically easily have been the ones that are very specific about solar energy efficiency. We are right now as a team encouraging folks to play around with language that could be broader than that, because we are seeing opportunities come up around electric vehicle charging, electric vehicle procurement, solar, even batteries, and energy efficiency. And you would want to have the flexibility to jump on any of those opportunities. So the extent to which you can, I think the best guidance is to do what you do best as energy committees, which is try to do a scan of the town and get a sense of what your priority projects are. Try to draft a purpose, a scope for let me turn back to this, try to draft a purpose that encompasses the things that you think are your priorities and be as open-ended as you think you can get away with, so that you don't kick yourself in 6 months if some other opportunity comes up and you're not able to ask the select board to give you some grant dollar match because you were too prescriptive in the language of creating your fund. So this is where you have to have a bit of a magic 8 ball and try really hard to think about the sorts of projects you hope to go after and try to make sure that you're creating a fund that's going to allow the town maximum flexibility, maximum opportunity as opportunities arise. And this is a moment in time because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Building Infrastructure Law. There are federal pots of money that are trickling down into the state in sort of steady pace and in somewhat unpredictable ways. And that means that you do actually have to be ready to jump, which is a good thing, to try to get money if that money is available. And you want to have something flexible enough that you can use in that situation. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. A lot of this is what repeat of the other resource. You want to make sure that whatever you're drafting, whatever your idea is, you're talking to your select board pretty frequently about your intention and getting their advice about how vague or specific you want to make it. And then making sure you're prepared at town meeting to make it a strong case for why this will benefit the town. And I think that's an easier case to make in 2024 than it might have been a few years ago, because we can give you talking points about the number of grant opportunities that have come up in the last year or two that towns have had 6, 8, 12 weeks to turn around and be ready to jump and show that they have matching funds, which is almost impossible for any town, as you know. And it's only possible if you, the energy committees, have done your work to get shovel-ready projects and have a pool of funds ready to show that you can furnish match and be ready to receive these funds. Okay, gonna stop sharing. Happy to chatter more about this or other things.
I just want to confirm that you'll send all these links to me and they will be in the website, and I'll send a summary with the links and a recording to other people, to everybody on the energy working group.
Absolutely. I will paste, so this document that I just shared is linked in the first resource, but I'm going to send capital reserve funds in the chats now. And tomorrow I can also follow up with you, Mary Beth and Susan, to make sure that the two of you have got the specific links that you need, even though I'm sure you're grabbing them as I'm posting them. Okay, we are 7 minutes to when I need to go at the very least. You all can stay if you're able. Are there other questions or comments or experience to share while you've got me here?
As a brand new energy commission, what's the difference between an energy commission and a committee? We ended up being appointed as a commission. And I'm just, while I have the chance, want to say how exciting it is to see all of these other small towns, some of them equally red to wear, and to be able to share information and experiences. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a resource about committee versus commission. I'll pop it in the chat for you, and I can give you the quick and dirty. Committee versus commission. So, I have to give you access. Anyone can view?
Sarah, can I add as well that a commission could also be an agent to expend, which is something that a committee could not do.
Actually, Katrina, if you are around and able to talk, you give the best explanation of this of anybody. Would you like to just explain it yourself?
Sure, absolutely.
Yay, thank you.
Okay. So an energy committee can be started. It can be joined by anyone. It doesn't have to be sponsored by the board. And it has the ability to make suggestions and ideas. So it can get information. It can be participating. It's very important, and we love energy committees. But if you want to take it up a notch, an energy commission means that they shall do certain things. So if a building was to go up or be renovated in your town, it would be a part of the job to go and be participating in that conversation about those things. So you are invited to the table, just like a conservation commission would be. You become very important that way because you need to participate. The other thing is that you shall do an annual audit of energy in your town. That means that you have to be provided with all that information. Where if you're a committee, you can ask and say, can I get some energy records? And they might give them to you. But as a commission, you actually have a right to them. So it just gives you a little bit more control and power. You also have a little bit more of a seat at the table. And again, you could be an energy commission can be an agent to expend, which is very helpful because that might take some of the challenges out of things. So,
which, in case it wasn't clear, that means that you could decide what the money goes to, as opposed to having to go to the select board if there was a fund established for this. Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Is it possible to establish like an energy capital reserve fund and then have it be funded at a later date? Like,
yes,
you have to define the mechanism, or you
can just create it. It's most common to create it and put a little bit in it, but we've seen like create it and put $100 in it. It's possible to just create the vessel. It's also possible to, we've seen there's an example in the little sheet that's somebody transforming an old like fire truck fund into an energy reserve fund. It's possible to sort of request purposing of an existing something of funds that might not be used for something, maybe ask that they be repurposed. And then you can, if you've got an existing fund, you can ask that the scope be broadened because you've got something new coming, or scope be narrowed if you needed that.
Thinking with community power through CPC&H, you can have the discretionary fund. So
yeah, it could be anything. I mean, until that happens, most commonly committees are going to their towns, and some of them more, I think it's Loudon goes, I might be misspeaking, every year and just gets $20,000 a year. And they've got a precedent now of that just being part of what the town votes on, which is great. We have also had towns who have specifically documented energy savings from past projects and then gone and made the case to put a proportion of that in the, so instead of saying just, out of the blue 5,000, they might say, we saved X much this year. We request 50% of that to go into this fund. That happens.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that if members of this committee or work group have experience with things like audits that they've done in their town before, it might be useful to make a list of the towns that have had some experience with that, so that towns that are just getting started can talk to the rest of us who've had that experience. The audit that Center Harbor had was done 15 years ago, but it was excellent, really excellent. And so I do think that we probably need to do another one. So for example, I'd be interested in finding out if anybody has done one in the past and is thinking of repeating it. We have a committee, not a commission, so therefore we don't have to do an audit annually, but those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, and something you should all be aware of, this is relatively recent in the last 6 months or so, but the Energy Circuit Rider team at Clean Energy New Hampshire has a list, and we call it our projects list. And anytime any of you reaches out to us to tell us you're doing something, we're putting it on our list and we're making note of where you were at in that process, and we're trying to track where you are. We do that in part so that we can do what you just said, Carol, which is try when someone comes and says, hey, who's working on energy audits or who's done this in the past, we can quickly go to that list and see who has mentioned this to us in the last year or who has a completed project recently. So that is both an ask for you to come to us when you're working on something and you're curious if we've heard about something similar. It's also an ask that if you're working on something, would you let us know? Because we're happy to have this database, but it works best if you tell us what you're working on. And our hope within the next year is to work towards having that and, contact lists and things that we might be able to make parts of just publicly available and as shared resources, but we're not quite there yet. There's obviously, privacy and contact information and things that we can't just share without having a plan. But we're happy to be the middleman for now. So it is now 4. I have to run because Clean Energy New Hampshire is having our 20th anniversary celebration tonight, and I've got to get myself down to the party. But have a wonderful afternoon. Oh no, Paul's going, what, party?
Thank you so much for your time.
Come on down to Bedford. Wonderful to see you all. We're going to be meeting again next month. This group sounds like it's kicking back off, and Mary Beth Raven, I believe you have volunteered to be sort of the host, and we'll keep this. Great. And I have said that our team is ready. We'll be at every one, and we'll we'll do our darndest to help make sure there's topics if there's none arising naturally, and show up with resources or get you connected if there's things you want to learn about, and we can help you figure out who you should talk to. Katrin says she's already at the event.
That was
Sorry, Susan, what was that? Susan must be calling in from a bad cell service area. But hello, Susan. All right, I am going to drop off though, and Mary Beth, take it from here, and see
Thank
many
you.
of you next month.
All right, I'll send out the recording and the materials when I have it. So thank you all
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
All right, have a nice day. Bye-bye.